In the 17th century, the liberties in Dublin were nicknamed Hell due to the sheer number of taverns, brothels, and gambling houses that dotted the streets. It also held the Black Dog, a prison with 12 cells. Two of these cells had 5 beds each, but the others were tiny and could barely hold one bed. If you were arrested, these rooms would cost you 1 shilling per night for each man, but this charge was not enforced or properly monitored, and much higher prices were often charged. 4 or 5 men could be shoved into one bed, but still had to pay the mandatory shilling, which would have been collected by the jailer's wife. Prisoners who could not pay this fee were thrown into a damp, dark dungeon, which was approximately 12 feet square and 8 feet high. This dungeon would hold between 14 to 20 people. Upon entering the Black Dog, you would be charged 2 shillings and twopence for a penny pot of food and drink. If you refused or were unable to pay, you would be stripped naked, your clothes taken and sold to make up the difference. It wasn't a nice place, is what I'm saying. In the midst of all this, a woman was found raped and murdered in the streets. Sadly, history does not record her name, but it did partially record the name of the guilty man, Dolocher. Dolocher was arrested and quickly sentenced to death and taken to the Black Dog to await his execution. An execution in this era meant being dragged in a cart through the streets to let the public see justice be done. You would be pelted with rotten fruit and vegetables, spat on, generally humiliated, before finally ascending the gallows to be hanged. For Dolocher, this was not to be. On the day of his execution, he was found dead in his cell, having managed to somehow commit suicide. There was a brief investigation, but it probably wasn't very in-depth. He had been sentenced to death, after all. He'd simply cut out the middleman, as it were. And so they closed the book on Dolocher and went back to their daily routines. Until Dolocher came back. In the days that followed Dolocher's suicide, a guard was found unconscious and bleeding outside what had once been Dolocher's cell. When the guard came around, he was paralyzed on one side of his body and screaming about a half-man, half-beast who had come at him out of the darkness, beating him around the head. Most of the guards laughed it off publicly, but privately they were probably very concerned. Something had happened to this man after all. Something had left him paralyzed. And maybe that something would strike again. A few days after that, it was discovered that the guard box for the area near Dolocher's cell was empty. The guard assigned to it had abandoned his post. A search soon found his clothes ripped and torn. Something had attacked him and dragged his body away. And after this, the reign of terror truly began. The very next day, a woman went to the police claiming that a man with a pig's head had attacked her, trying to gore her with his tusks and biting at her. She believed that it was Dolocher, somehow restored to life. A magistrate writing her account phonetically misheard her saying the Dolocher as Dolocher. And that's how he got the name Dolocher. The attacks would happen again, almost nightly, with one particularly tragic case involving a pregnant woman who miscarried after her attack. The rumors were now spreading like wildfire that Dolocher, a man sentenced to hang for attacking women, had returned, cursed to have his face match his beastly soul, free to continue his attacks. All winter long, women feared to go out after dark, until finally a brave band of likely lads got together in a pub on Cook Street and resolved to solve the problem the only way they knew: by putting every pig they saw to the sword.
Remember, get him alive if you can, but get him! But search every ravine, every crevice, but the fiend must be found! Are you ready? Light your torches and go!
So basically, a bunch of tanked up booze bags went on a rampage slaughtering pigs in the middle of the night. They killed and injured every pig they saw, wild or domestic. There's at least one account of them kicking in doors and fences to get at a domestic pig that was being reared for food. Witnesses of the scene described it as the devil's cure for an ugly beast. An interesting fact that I didn't know, Dublin was plagued with pigs at the time. They roamed the streets, much like rats do in modern era, but much bigger and far more aggressive. In fact, special teams of bailiffs would frequently hunt these wild hogs with pikes. By the end of our little rampage, there were dozens, if not hundreds, of dead or injured pigs lying in the street. But by the cold light of morning, they had all vanished. There was no trace of any slaughtered pig anywhere to be found. Much like the guard who had gone missing in the Black Dog. Had perhaps some good Samaritans clean up the mess, or maybe an enterprising few people sold the carcasses to the slaughterhouse or the butcher. Or had the Dolocher spirited them away, for reasons known only to him. As the nights grew shorter, the Dolocher apparently vanished. After a while, people began to hope that the vigilantes had either scared him off or perhaps even killed him in that slaughter. But when the summer ended and the nights once again grew longer, the Dolocher made his triumphant return with an attack at Fisher's Alley beside Wood Quay. The attacks would continue, almost nightly, until one rainy night. As the Dolocher skulked in the shadows, it noticed a woman in a shawl leaving a pub in hell alone. It followed her at a distance, waiting for the right moment to strike, before finally snarling and pouncing on the lone woman. This was the Dolocher's first, only, and final mistake. For the woman in the shawl was no woman at all, but a strapping blacksmith who had borrowed a woman's shawl as part of a merry prank. And with a mighty cry of, "Be ye Dolocher, or be ye devil, or what ye may, take that!" he began brutally beating the Dolocher into submission. The sound of the blacksmith beating the Dolocher to death drew a crowd from the pubs, the brothels, and nearby houses. Some even joined in, grabbing sticks, clubs, whatever came to hand.
Evil dies tonight!
Finally, the Dolocher lay dying in the rain, surrounded by the people he had terrorized over nearly 2 years. They tore the pig's head from him, revealing the missing prison guard. Through broken teeth, he confessed his crimes. He had helped Dolocher kill himself. He faked his death. He even hid in plain sight as one of the men slaughtering the pigs, and then hid the carcasses. All to create the legend of the Dolocher. All so he could indulge his own violent fantasies. By the next day, he would be dead of his injuries. And that is how the Dolocher ended. Now, I know what you're thinking. It all seems a bit elaborate, doesn't it? Especially for the 17th century. This unnamed prison guard apparently set out to create a legend, and succeeded to a point. But why all the theatrics? No doubt the story has been exaggerated through the centuries. But even at its most bare bones, this is a man who dressed up as a pig to attack women. Was he just a madman? A highly intelligent madman, but a madman nonetheless? Or were there indeed some infernal influences on the Dolocher? So, if you ever find yourself in the Liberties after dark, keep an eye out. Because you never know if the Dolocher might come back.